everybody. Just get myself set up here. Every time is a challenge in my glamorous garage office. We're going to start the episode in just a second here. And I'm going to do an update on what's going on with Jay. But primarily, we're going to be exploring the idea of the paramilitary model in prisons, whatever that means. I had never thought about this at all until just a couple of years ago, and how it impacts in a negative way correctional staff and prison residents both, and what maybe we could do instead. So I think we're set here. Get my script going and start my recording software for the audio. It's kind of like patting my head and rubbing my stomach, you know? It's like a lot of things going on at once for this girl's brain, but I do my best. All right, we're in the right place here to hit record. All right, and let's see, can I read without my glasses? No, I cannot, so that's all right. We're just going to do glasses and have a little glare, right? What's a little glare among friends? All right, let's get started. If you are here live, please feel free to pop something into the chat box. And I may or may not reply right away because the multitasking issues already referred to. But if I don't refer to it and reply right away, I will refer to the chat box at the end. So if you put something in there, I will read it and reply to it, just maybe not immediately. All right. Here we go. Pressing record. And hello, friends. This is the last in real time episode as we follow Jay's story up close over the last month. So after an anonymous accusation and a series of badly handled moments of communication by staff, a frustrated punch to a door landed Jay in isolation in medical. First, getting his hand patched up. He had a fracture and some lacerations, and then on suicide watch for 12 days. And what has followed is a transfer to temporary housing in a special unit at another prison for a week, and finally transport to the prison that will be his home for the foreseeable future. So I'm excited to record today's episode here on Monday, July 24th, 2023, because Jay's doing really, really well after a brutal month. And I'm excited to tell you about some of the beautiful moments along the way that helped him choose life. If you've been around prison care for very long, you know that Jay has a thing he likes to say, and it carries a ton of power. He says, circumstances being what they are, and me being who I choose to be. And then he talks about the decision he's making. So this last month has been a profound example of what that looks like lived out. Circumstances being what they are, and me being who I choose to be. Now, some of those circumstances have been ugly, and some of them have been absolutely beautiful. And in the face of each set of circumstances, Jay has had to choose who he wants to be. This is true for every one of us, right? We don't get to control our circumstances, and we don't get to excuse ourselves for bad choices when we are faced with circumstances that we did not want in our lives. A breakup, right? Bad news from our test results at the doctor. Financial crisis. I mean, stuff happens, and we have to decide how we will respond. Our response actually has much greater impact on our lives going forward than the circumstances that called for a response do. To respond rather than to react. Or perhaps more accurately, to react briefly, because we can't help being human with automatic hormonal stress responses, right? And with emotions that can temporarily overwhelm us. But then to move past reaction into response, into choice. This is what healthy, growth-oriented humans do in the face of a crisis. But For people in prison neighborhoods, while that same need to respond well is paramount, the deck is stacked against them in some unique ways. And this is true for people wearing both kinds of uniforms. This is a reality of the toxic culture inside most prisons. That toxic culture makes healthy response to crisis more difficult for everyone than it would be on the outside. We're going to explore that idea in a few moments, but first, your update. Okay, so as of last Tuesday night, Jay has been moved to the prison that will be his new home for the foreseeable future. He was still in temporary housing there as of yesterday, but he expects to move into one of the regular units in the next day or two. He has had his personal property returned to him, yay! And while several items have disappeared, it must be repurchased from commissary, in particular his boots, which got his own blood on them when he cut his hand, and then they were summarily destroyed rather than just being held for him to clean up after his release from isolation. They just throw him out. There goes $80. But anyway, he's feeling more on top of his life at last. When he left his original prison last 2 weeks ago, he was taken by bus to a facility that acts as a holding unit for all the prisoners in the state. So when someone has to leave one prison because of a problem and administration wants them gone sooner rather than later, they are taken to this one unit in one prison and they stay there for as long as it takes to figure out where the best fit is for them long term. His week in this temporary unit was challenging in a number of ways, and I touched on some of that in last week's episode. It was not a very clean facility. It was old. There were problems with rats and roaches that made it unpleasant. It was also an open 3-tier layout with no doors, only bars. So the din was constant. There was just no break from the noise. And because it's temporary housing for people who are just passing through, Jay had 5 different cellmates in 8 days. That meant sleeping inches away from a total stranger every time a new cellie was brought in. But there were positives too. The food was a huge improvement over the place he has lived for the last 5 years. And the staff seemed, as he described it, more comfortable in their roles. They were still stern, but they were more approachable. They seemed less perpetually stressed out. So he got good help examining his file from a sergeant there. And unfortunately, there came a new crisis point, and that was where we were when I recorded last week's episode. That's where we kind of left things. In looking at his file, Jay learned that he was listed as available to every medium security prison in the state. So apparently it's kind of like Tinder, and you like swipe based on whether you want this prison inmate to come to your facility. Yeah. So when he was told what was going to happen while he was on suicide watch, he was told again and again by multiple staff and administrators that they were being forced to transfer him out to a new prison because his psych code had changed. So because he was now listed as a P4, he had been coded P3 before that. Their facility did not have services needed for a P4, and so he would have to leave. It was nothing personal. His rules violation, which was simply destruction of property, was not a big ugly one. He just had to leave because his P code had changed and he had to be placed in a prison with serious psych services. So then Jay saw his file and he learned that he was showing as available to all of the medium security prisons in the state, not just the 4 that are described by the Department of Corrections on their website as having psych units. So he was scared. I mean, the whole reason that he was having to endure a transfer and all of the stressors with that, that was in order to get somewhere with resources that professionals had decided he needed. This is what he had been told. And now he learns that he could land anywhere and maybe not have mental health help after all. Apparently, he was deemed by someone too unstable to be housed in a regular facility, but they were going to send him to a new one of those anyway. So this is where the story takes a weirdo turn. On his behalf, I reached out by voicemail and email to the state, clearly explaining the situation and asking for help getting this corrected on his file. And I received a really polite, detailed email reply from somebody at the State Department of Corrections who explained that, oh, no, Jay was fine to go to any medium security prison in the state because all of these facilities are equipped and required to provide mental health services to inmates up to and including P4 ratings. The 4 designated psych unit prisons, those are only for acute residential care. So like schizophrenia in active psychosis or persistent severe self-mutilation. In other words, behavior so dangerous that on the outside, we would take our loved ones to a locked ward at a hospital to get them through a mental health crisis that they were experiencing. So Jay really didn't need anything close to that level of treatment, and he was green lighted to go to any of the prisons with openings. So, what was with the line of explanation that Jay was given at that original facility? How they had no choice but to move him because he needed services that they could not provide. Because according to the state, they have those services and they are required to offer them. I can certainly testify to the fact that Jay has never received any mental health services during his 5 years there. He has chosen not to take medicine, but that was really his only option, medicine. If he wanted to, he could have been evaluated remotely by the psychiatrist who oversees the meds via telehealth, okay, nothing in person, and been prescribed one of the drugs on the approved list. And the list is very short when compared with the meds that a doctor might try on the outside. It's a cost-saving measure. They only have certain drugs that they can prescribe. And Jay could have picked it up and taken his pills at Medline every day. But because he had never had a real evaluation done where he was prescribed any meds pre-incarceration, and because he has seen people go through hell because they were on meds that were not the right fit for their brains, he was unwilling to try medicine, and that was his only option for support. Not only is there no professional talk therapy, but even the peer program, the program that trained other residents to offer emotional and relational support to their neighbors who request it, had been discontinued right around the time that Jay moved there 5 years ago. So no peer counselors either. And yet, the state seems to think that this prison facility is offering mental health services and should be offering enough of them that people with a P4 code could still be safely housed there and supported in healthy living. Okay, so this raises two questions. One, if the state says that part of your tax dollar budget is supposed to provide support for mental health, why is it okay that you are simply not doing it? And where is that money being spent? Oh, that's right. Private prisons. Private prisons have very little oversight from the state, and they answer primarily to their shareholders. And yes, I sound mad about this. The fundamental idea of prisons that are designed to generate profit for shareholders is disgusting. Number two, if Jay did not have to be transferred because of his psych code, and if his rules violation was not that big a deal, and if the alleged fight was never a real thing, and the person with whom Jay had argued ended up in the same space as Jay just a few days later, then why did they feel that they simply had to transfer him? It's kind of hard not to wonder if there was some more personal agenda at work. And there can be no question that something was making the decisions, and it was not being honestly communicated to Jay. Now, I'm willing to give benefit of the doubt. Maybe there was a very good reason that staff and administration decided Jay simply had to live in a different prison neighborhood. But why lie to him about it? I have a problem with the deceit. We will likely never know why things went sideways the way they did. But in the process of all the chaos and the yuck, some truly beautiful moments emerged, and that's where I want to focus. Jay will share some of this with you on future episodes when he is in a healthy enough headspace to talk about it. But I can give you a little glimpse. Two things just really precious. A couple of COs who were assigned to watch Jay during Suicide Watch decided that it was ridiculous that he was only being brought peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for every meal after meal. See, on Suicide Watch, you're not allowed to have utensils, so they have to give you finger food. But apparently the only food that a human can eat without utensils is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, because that is what showed up over and over, meal after meal, multiple days. So eventually one CO volunteered to go to the kitchen to bring up a tray personally for each meal because the kitchen wouldn't send real food up. And so after a few days, Jay began receiving real food that could be managed without utensils. And he felt better from the nutrition and better from the personal sacrifice that COs were willing to make on his behalf. It really meant a lot to him. Additionally, he was told by one CO that he knows Jay is a good guy, that he knows he treats people right, and that it made him really mad when he saw them bring him through all shackled up, especially because the only person Jay had hurt was himself. And the CO told Jay to choose life because he believed his life was worth living. Guys, there are good humans in correctional officer uniforms. I hope that if nothing else, this podcast shines a light on that truth, especially among people like me the families of loved ones who are incarcerated. We need to realize that there are good humans in correctional officer uniforms. I recognize personally that these COs that I'm talking about were using time and energy that was already in short supply to them. They were choosing to see a person in front of them rather than an assigned task. They were realizing that their presence might help a person choose to live in the face of pain rather than take his own life. They didn't see a DOC number. And they didn't see only their own suffering, their lack of sleep, or their frustrations at work or at home, or their emotional distress from something ugly that had happened in front of them earlier on that shift. They chose to look at and respond with compassion to someone in the other uniform who needed some help. And if those COs are listening to this episode, please know, I think you are rock stars. Discernment and kindness made a difference in the world, and it happened on your shift. Thank you. These COs essentially said, circumstances being what they are, and me being who I choose to be. And it was hard for them to do that. See, they exist in an industry that has a paramilitary structure. Let's dig into that a little bit. We all know the difficulties faced by people who have to follow orders that violate something within their own conscience, right? There are countless movies about people serving in the military who are faced with deeply complex circumstances. And if they disobey orders, they will probably be disciplined, and they may well lose their entire career because of it. Well, similarly, if a CO finds themselves in deeply complex circumstances and decides to follow their own conscience instead of following protocol, they risk discipline. In fact, they are very likely to be found out because the facility has cameras covering most of the areas. The question is not really whether anybody higher up will find out, it's whether that higher up will decide to discipline them or not. So it's more of a crapshoot. Your boss is watching. You just have to hope that your boss is in a reasonable and a common sense frame of mind when they find out what you did, rather than in a stressed out, we're getting ready for a safety audit and you decided to do this now frame of mind. But here's the real problem, guys. In a military organization, orders are passed down to behave in a certain way in order to stand against our country's enemy, the military forces protecting a hostile nation. In the paramilitary model, that is the U.S. prison system, the enemy is the residents in the facility where you work. Your orders are about how you will deal with people who are serving prison sentences. That's the enemy. Some of them are hostile. Some of them are choosing to behave as enemies of the state, absolutely, but many of them are not. And those who are not are still to be treated following the same protocols that you use with those who are. As long as there is no clear distinction of who the enemy is, a paramilitary model is going to be a serious problem in the running of prisons. If the COs, who are representatives of the state, have no way of distinguishing, quote, enemy soldiers operating with hostile intent from, quote, civilians who are living peacefully in this enemy town, how can they faithfully carry out orders in the course of their duty? The enemy in this paramilitary prison model is the people group we are hoping to correct under the guidance of the Department of Corrections in each state. So the enemy includes hundreds in every facility who are consistently demonstrating pro-social behavior, as well as hundreds more who are willing to learn pro-social behavior if somebody introduces them to the concept, because it's something they've never encountered before because of poverty, lack of education, or lack of positive relationships in their lives. And then there are the knuckleheads who just don't want to grow up, don't want to be responsible, would rather destroy than build. I get it. There are plenty of those too. But should the orders handed down for controlling them be the same orders that govern the movement and behavior of all the rest? Who is the enemy? Circumstances being what they are, and me being who I choose to be, is a tough thing for a correctional officer to live out. And for the residents, no great surprise here. The system institutionalizes and dehumanizes at every turn. Decisions about the simplest, most basic things are taken away from you. You get used to being guided through your days by the institution, and it becomes harder and harder to remember that you actually still have a choice to make when confronted with a difficult circumstance. This is why people who have been incarcerated for more than a couple of years who return home have tremendous emotional and relational difficulty functioning on the outside again after serving their sentence. Did you know that some are agoraphobic? They fear leaving their houses. They even don't leave their bedroom within the house, sometimes for months or more after they've been released from prison. Some develop eating disorders because their food has been controlled for them for so long that they no longer know how to listen to their body's cues for hunger or satiation. Some are paralyzed by the smallest decisions because they've lost their confidence to choose for themselves. Their choices were made for them for too long. The list of issues goes on and on. It's hard for all of us to choose who we want to be in the face of difficulty. But in the paramilitary model of a prison neighborhood, it is much harder. And it's harder for people wearing both kinds of uniforms. Is there a better model? Well, heck yes. We don't have to start at the drawing board on this one. There are other countries that have been operating their correction system using a model of dynamic security that works so much better. We don't have to figure it out on our own. We can learn from people who have been getting the success we want for decades. The people who serve prison sentences in these dynamic security systems rarely return for reoffending after release. And when you talk to the COs in these systems, they have a dramatically different story to tell than the COs in U.S. prisons. A paramilitary structure does not work well for anyone. Let's support the efforts of everyone in prison neighborhoods to regularly say to themselves, circumstances being what they are and me being who I choose to be. Personal challenges of the last month have slowed down some of the changes and the new resources that I had been planning to implement at PrisonCare.org this summer. But please don't give up on me. Good stuff is coming and coming soon. Prison Care's community director, Kim, and I are going on a 4-day retreat together this week. And part of that time will be for personal growth work, but a big chunk of it will be planning and prioritizing Prison Care's next steps. So please visit PrisonCare.org to learn more. Get involved as a pen pal encourager. Support this 100% compassionate person-funded 501c3 organization. Share the podcast with friends. Leave us a review, please, pretty please, on your favorite podcasting platform. Follow us on social media and on YouTube. Continue caring about all the people inside the razor wire. And thanks for listening today. And thank you, friends, for watching the video. I plan to, as much as possible, continue doing lives periodically with the podcast when we do interview episodes on the phone with folks on the inside. That might be a little trickier. I haven't figured that one out yet. But solo episodes will probably continue to put up here on YouTube. So I would appreciate your comments. I would appreciate you sharing. And I really, really appreciate you caring. Bye.